Richard and Laura were married. They lived in a small house. It was a yellow house. It had a red door. Richard liked the colour blue, but Laura had won that argument, like she won all arguments. Richard was a simple man. He enjoyed his routines. He woke up, drank coffee, and went to work. He sold insurance. Not very exciting, but it paid the bills. Laura, however, was different. Laura was full of surprises. She was a painter. Her paintings were strange. They were colourful and abstract. Richard didn't understand them, but he pretended to. He loved Laura. He found her quirks endearing, mostly. One day, Richard stumbled upon one of Laura's secrets. It wasn't a hidden stash of cookies or a secret admirer's letters. It was far stranger. It was a book, a very old leather-bound book tucked away in their attic.
What's this?
Richard picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. The cover was blank. He blew off the dust. It smelled old, like a library. He opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and writing. It looked like something out of a movie, something magical. Richard chuckled.
Laura and her eccentricities.
He was about to put it back when he saw a word he recognized.
Youth. A spell book? Seriously, Laura?
It's nothing, dear, just an old family heirloom.
Richard raised an eyebrow. He knew Laura well enough to sense when she was hiding something.
A family heirloom, huh? So you come from a long line of witches?
It's not what you think, just silly spells. Harmless fun.
Richard snatched the book back. He flipped through the pages.
Harmless, you say? What about this one? Eternal youth? Sounds pretty serious to me.
Laura tried to grab the book again, but Richard held it out of reach. He was intrigued. He had always been self-conscious about his age, the wrinkles, the receding hairline. What if this spell book was real?
Come on, Laura, just a little spell for fun.
Laura hesitated, her eyes darting between Richard and the book. Richard knew she was considering it. He pressed his advantage.
Wouldn't it be amazing to relive our youth? We could do all the things we missed out on.
Fine, but don't blame me if you turn into a toad.
The room filled with a strange blue light. It smelled like burnt popcorn and lavender. Richard felt a tingling sensation all over his body. He closed his eyes, anticipating the transformation. He imagined himself as a young, strapping lad full of vigor and vitality. When he opened his eyes, the blue light was gone. He looked down at his body, expecting to see rippling muscles and youthful skin. Instead, he saw nothing. His vision was too low. He looked across at Laura. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with horror, and with...
What happened?
Then he heard it, his own voice, high-pitched, squeaky, like a...
Oh my God.
Richard looked down again. This time he saw it. A tiny hand, chubby and small, reaching up from the floor. He had turned into a toddler with a 40-year-old's mind trapped inside.
You turned me into a baby.
Laura rushed over to him, her face a mixture of panic and amusement.
I'm so sorry, Richard. It must have worked a little too well.
Richard wanted to scream, but all that came out was a frustrated gurgle. He was a toddler who had to wear diapers again. This was not what he had signed up for. Life as a toddler was humiliating. Richard couldn't even go to the bathroom by himself. He couldn't reach the toilet. He couldn't explain to Laura what he needed. He resorted to pointing and grunting. It was demeaning.
The worst part? Laura started lactating. Yes, lactating. Apparently, her maternal instincts were as strong as her spellcasting abilities. She insisted on breastfeeding me.
It's natural, Richard, she'd say, cradling him in her arms, just like old times.
Except it wasn't like old times. It was weird, it was awkward, it was oddly comforting. Richard hated himself for enjoying it. The situation was absurd.
Shopping for clothes was another adventure. I, a grown man, was forced to wear onesies with silly slogans like Mommy's Little Man and I Love My Diaper.
He even had to endure baths with rubber duckies. He tried to explain to Laura that he could bathe himself. He tried to tell her he didn't need to play with rubber duckies. His words came out as incoherent babble.
Laura just chuckled and pinched his cheeks. "You're such a cute baby," she'd coo.
Richard sighed inwardly. His life had become a sitcom. Months passed. Richard, the toddler with a middle-aged man's mind, adjusted. He learned to communicate with Laura using a combination of baby sign language and strategic pointing. He even started to enjoy the simple things again, the feel of the sun on his skin, the taste of pureed peas, the joy of knocking down a tower of blocks. It was a strange sort of liberation.
Then one day Laura came home with a triumphant grin. "I did it, Richard," she exclaimed, holding up the spell book. "I found a way to reverse the spell."
Richard stared at her with his big baby blue eyes. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or terrified. The reversal was unpleasant. Imagine a giant squeezing you out of a sausage casing. That was the closest Richard could come to describing it. When it was over, he was no longer a toddler. He wasn't middle-aged either. He was young, mid-20s, with a full head of hair and a body that could rival an Olympian.
How do I look? He asked, flexing his bicep.
Laura laughed. "Like a younger, hotter version of yourself," she said, winking.
Richard grinned. Maybe this whole spell thing wasn't so bad after all. He had a new lease on life, a second chance at youth. He was ready to make the most of it. He just hoped Laura wouldn't accidentally turn him into a frog next time.